OSHA, or the Oregon Occupational Safety and Health Agency, wants to extend the COVID-19 related rules for masks, social distancing, and training in workplaces until the pandemic ends. That's turned into a lot of misinformation online about these rules lasting forever. Aaron Corvin is the Public Information Officer for Oregon OSHA.
Does OSHA want to make businesses enforce this mask mandate forever?
No.
People have posted things like, "Here's the info to try and fight against OSHA and Kate Brown making the COVID-19 restrictions permanent." And "I'm very concerned that they will never lift these restrictions, and we cannot allow OSHA to make these rules permanent." Again, OSHA says none of these statements are true. In November, OSHA adopted a temporary emergency rule to protect against COVID in the workplace. The rule required masks, social distancing, and training related to the pandemic. It expires in May of this year. Since COVID is not over, they want to keep the mandate going. To do so, OSHA wants to pass a permanent rule the agency will repeal when the pandemic is over.
Why not just extend this temporary rule instead of enforcing this permanent rule? Because I think people are just scared by the word permanent.
That's understandable. So under state law, we are not allowed to extend a temporary rule beyond 180 days. That's concrete, that's in state law, and we're following that.
Corvin said don't take his word for it. If you read the proposed rule, the plan to repeal is written as part of the plan on page 2. They are seeing so many incorrect posts about the rule change, they put up these infographics trying to dispel misinformation, but it's not really working.
It's sad. It's unfortunate. I think what we've attempted to do is stay focused on our mission, which is advancing workplace health and safety for all Oregonians.
If you want to weigh in, OSHA urges you to do that. They are taking public comment until April 2nd. I'm Kristen Severance, KGW News.